Sarah Martinez had always been invisible. At 28, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall. With brown hair she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. When she walked through the halls of Joint Base Andrews, most people barely noticed her. The few who did usually assumed she worked in administration or maybe the commissary. They were wrong. Sarah was a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and she held a very special job that almost nobody knew about. For the past 6 years, she had been part of an elite reconnaissance unit that operated in the shadows. While other Marines got medals and recognition, Sarah and her team worked in complete secrecy. Their missions never made the news. Their successes were never celebrated publicly. Most of the time, even their own families didn't know what they really did, but that was about to change. The morning that would make Sarah famous started like any other. She woke up at 500 hours in her small apartment off base, did her usual workout routine, and ate a simple breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee. She arrived at the classified briefing room 30 minutes early, as she always did. Sarah believed in being prepared. Colonel James Mitchell was already there, studying satellite photos spread across the metal table. He was a tall, grizzled man in his 50s who had been leading special operations for over 20 years. When Sarah entered, he looked up and nodded. "Morning, Martinez. Ready for another day at the office?" Sarah saluted crisply. "Yes, sir. What's the situation?" Colonel Mitchell gestured to the photos. "We've got a problem in Syria. Intelligence reports that a group of high-value targets are meeting at a compound outside Aleppo. These aren't just any terrorists. We're talking about the leadership of 3 different organizations that have been responsible for attacks on American interests worldwide." He pointed to different locations marked on the aerial photos. 8 confirmed targets. All of them are on our most wanted list. Some have bounties of over $10 million each. Sarah studied the images carefully. The compound was large, with multiple buildings surrounded by high walls. She could see guard towers and what looked like patrol routes. "Timeline, sir?" "That's the problem. Our intelligence says they'll only be there for 1 day. Today. They're having some kind of leadership summit, and then they'll scatter back to their hiding places. This might be our only chance to get all of them together." Colonel Mitchell pulled out another set of photos. "The area is heavily defended. Ground assault would result in significant casualties, and there's no guarantee we could prevent them from escaping. Airstrikes are out because there are civilians in the surrounding area." Sarah nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand why they had called her. "What about the rest of the team?" "That's another problem. Alpha Team is deployed in Afghanistan. Bravo Team is finishing up an operation in Nigeria. Charlie Team..." He paused. "Charlie Team was compromised during an operation in Yemen 2 days ago. The entire team had to be extracted. They're all fine, but they won't be operational for at least 2 weeks." The room fell silent. Sarah realized what he was suggesting, but she waited for him to say it. Colonel Mitchell looked directly at her. "Martinez, I need someone who can get close to that compound without being detected and neutralize all 8 targets before they realize what's happening. Someone who can work alone and get the job done." "Sir, are you asking me to conduct a solo mission against 8 high-value targets?" "I'm asking you to do what you do best. You've never missed a target. Your record for stealth operations is perfect. You can get in and out without anyone knowing you were there until it's too late." Sarah considered the implications. A solo mission against 8 targets was unprecedented. Most sniper operations involved teams of at least 4 people, a shooter, a spotter, and 2 security personnel. Going alone meant she would have to handle reconnaissance, target identification, shooting, and extraction all by herself. "What's the intelligence on their security?" Colonel Mitchell spread out more photos. "Approximately 30 guards total. Most are stationed around the perimeter. The targets will be meeting in the main building starting at 1400 hours local time. Our satellite imagery shows they usually have a meal together on the rooftop terrace around 14:30 hours. That's your window. Sarah studied the photos more carefully. The compound had some natural high ground about 800 meters to the east, perfect sniper range, but also heavily exposed. What about exfiltration? You'll go in through the eastern mountains. We'll have a helicopter standing by 20 kilometers out, but you'll need to reach the extraction point on foot. Estimated time from first shot to pickup should be no more than 30 minutes. 30 minutes, 8 targets. Solo operation. Sarah had done difficult missions before, but nothing quite like this. Still, she felt a familiar calm settling over her. This was what she had trained for her entire adult life. I'll need my custom rifle and special ammunition, full ghillie suit for desert terrain, and I want to review the meteorological data for the area. Colonel Mitchell smiled for the first time that morning. I figured you'd say yes. Your gear is already being loaded onto the transport plane. You wheels up in 2 hours. As Sarah left the briefing room, she passed by the operations center, where dozens of analysts and technicians were monitoring screens and radio frequencies. Some of them looked up as she walked by, but she could see they had no idea who she was or what she was about to do. That was fine with her. Sarah had never wanted fame or recognition. She had joined the Marines because she believed in protecting her country and her fellow Americans. The missions she completed successfully meant that families could sleep safely at night, that terrorists couldn't carry out their plans, that the world was a little bit safer. But she also knew that today would be different. 8 high-value targets in one operation would definitely get attention from the top brass. If she succeeded, it would be the kind of mission that made careers and earned medals. If she failed, it would probably end her career and might cost American lives in the future. 2 hours later, Sarah was aboard a military transport plane flying toward the Middle East. She spent the flight time reviewing the mission parameters, studying satellite photos, and checking her equipment. Her rifle was a custom-built precision instrument that she had been using for 3 years. Every part of it had been modified specifically for her height, arm length, and shooting style. The ammunition was specially designed for maximum accuracy at long range. She also spent time preparing mentally. Sarah had learned early in her career that successful missions required more than just good equipment and training. They required the ability to stay completely calm under pressure, to make split-second decisions, and to execute complex plans while adapting to changing circumstances. During her years in the Marines, Sarah had developed her own pre-mission ritual. She would visualize the entire operation from beginning to end, imagining every possible scenario and how she would respond. She would review her training, her previous successes, and remind herself of why the mission was important. By the time the plane began its descent toward the classified airfield, Sarah felt completely ready. She had reviewed every detail, anticipated every possible complication, and prepared her mind for what she needed to do. The airfield was located in a country that Sarah couldn't name publicly, but it was close enough to Syria to allow for quick insertion and extraction. As the plane landed, she could see the desert landscape stretching in all directions under the bright afternoon sun. A young lieutenant met her at the plane. "Sergeant Martinez? I'm Lieutenant Thompson. I'll be coordinating your insertion and extraction." Sarah grabbed her gear bag and rifle case. "What's the current status of the targets?" "Still on schedule. Our latest satellite pass shows all 8 individuals have arrived at the compound. They're expected to have their meeting on the rooftop at 14:30 hours local time, just as predicted." They walked toward a waiting helicopter, a small, fast aircraft designed for special operations. "How's the weather?" "Perfect conditions, clear skies, minimal wind. Temperature is about 35 degrees Celsius, but humidity is low. Visibility is excellent." Sarah nodded. Good weather meant she wouldn't have to compensate for wind or atmospheric conditions. It also meant she would be more exposed to enemy observation, but she was confident in her ability to remain hidden. As they approached the helicopter, Lieutenant Thompson handed her a secure radio. "You'll have constant communication with our operations center. Call sign is Phoenix Base. We'll be monitoring the target area through satellite and drone coverage." Sarah clipped the radio to her gear. "Understood. What about emergency extraction? If things go wrong, we have a quick reaction force standing by." "But sir, your orders are to avoid engagement with enemy forces if possible. This is supposed to be a clean operation." "Copy that." Sarah climbed into the helicopter and secured her gear. As the aircraft lifted off, she looked down at the desert landscape passing below. Somewhere out there, 8 of the world's most dangerous terrorists were having what they thought was a safe meeting. They had no idea that a small, quiet Marine was about to change their plans permanently. The helicopter flew low and fast across the desert, following terrain features to avoid radar detection. Sarah used the flight time to make final preparations. She assembled her rifle, checked her scope settings, and reviewed the mission timeline one more time. 30 minutes later, the helicopter began to descend toward the insertion point. Sarah could see the target compound in the distance, a cluster of tan buildings surrounded by walls and guard towers. It looked peaceful from the air, but she knew it was heavily defended. 2 minutes to insertion," the pilot called over the intercom. Sarah took a deep breath and focused on the task ahead. In less than an hour, she would either complete one of the most successful counterterrorism operations in recent history, or she would be dead. Either way, the world was about to learn that the quiet Marine they had ignored for so many years was capable of extraordinary things. The helicopter touched down briefly, just long enough for Sarah to jump out with her gear. As it lifted off and disappeared into the afternoon sky, she found herself alone in the desert, 800 meters from 8 of the world's most wanted men. It was time to go to work. The desert heat hit Sarah like a wall as the helicopter disappeared into the distance. She was alone now, surrounded by rocky terrain and sparse vegetation under the harsh Middle Eastern sun. The silence was complete except for the distant sound of wind across the rocks. Sarah immediately began moving toward the target compound. She had studied the route during the flight, memorizing every ridge, every rock formation, and every piece of cover between her insertion point and the shooting position she had selected from satellite photos. The distance was approximately 2 kilometers, and she needed to cover it without being detected by the compound security patrols. Moving through hostile territory alone required patience and skill that few people possessed. Sarah had been trained by some of the best reconnaissance specialists in the world. She knew how to use shadows, natural camouflage, and terrain features to become virtually invisible. More importantly, she knew how to move slowly enough that human eyes wouldn't detect motion, even if someone was looking directly at her. The first kilometer took her 40 minutes to cover. She moved in short bursts, never more than 20 meters at a time, always from one piece of cover to another. Between movements, she would remain completely still for several minutes, watching and listening for any sign that she had been detected. Through her scope, she could see the compound guards going about their normal routines. They were positioned in the towers and walked regular patrols around the perimeter, but they appeared relaxed. They obviously didn't expect any threat from the barren landscape around them. Sarah's radio crackled softly in her earpiece. "Phoenix Base to Lone Wolf, how copy?" "Lone Wolf reads you 5 by 5, she whispered into her throat microphone. "Proceeding to target position." "Roger, Lone Wolf. Satellite shows all 8 targets are still inside the main building. No change in security posture around the compound." Sarah clicked her radio twice to acknowledge without speaking. She was now close enough that voices might carry to the enemy positions. As she approached the final ridge that would give her line of sight to the compound, Sarah slowed her pace even more. This was the most dangerous part of the approach. Once she crested the ridge, she would be exposed to observation from the compound, but she would also have her first real look at the target area. She low-crawled the final 100 meters, pulling herself forward on her elbows while keeping her rifle cradled in her arms. The ghillie suit she wore broke up her silhouette and made her blend into the rocky ground, but it also made movement difficult and uncomfortable in the heat. When she finally reached the shooting position, Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction. The location was perfect. She had clear sight lines to the compound's main building and the rooftop terrace where the targets would be meeting. The range was exactly 847 meters according to her rangefinder, well within her comfort zone for precision shooting. Sarah began setting up her position with practiced efficiency. She arranged several rocks to create a stable shooting rest for her rifle, positioned her gear within easy reach, and established clear escape routes in case she needed to withdraw quickly. She also set up a small periscope device that would let her observe the target area without exposing her head above the rocks. "Phoenix Base, Lone Wolf is in position," she whispered into her radio. "Copy, Lone Wolf. Time now is 14:15 hours local. Targets should be moving to the rooftop in approximately 15 minutes. Sarah began her final preparations. She verified her scope settings, checked the wind conditions, and calculated the ballistics for the shots she would need to make. At this range, she needed to account for bullet drop, wind drift, and the effects of heat and humidity on her ammunition's performance. She also began studying the target area through her powerful scope. The rooftop terrace was a large, open space with several tables and chairs arranged for the meeting. There was minimal cover, which was good for her, but would also mean the targets would likely move quickly once the shooting started. Sarah identified the best shooting positions and planned her sequence of shots. She would need to prioritize targets based on their importance and their likely reactions. Some would probably try to run for cover inside the building. Others might try to escape by jumping from the rooftop to adjacent buildings. A few might even try to fight back, though they would have no idea where the shots were coming from. At 14:28 hours, movement began on the rooftop terrace. Sarah watched through her scope as men in traditional Middle Eastern clothing began emerging from the stairwell. She recognized several faces from the intelligence photos she had studied. "Phoenix Base, Lone Wolf has eyes on targets. Count 8 individuals now on the rooftop. Roger, Lone Wolf, you are cleared hot. Execute when ready." Sarah took a slow, deep breath and settled into her shooting position. This was the moment she had trained for throughout her entire career. 8 shots, 8 targets, one opportunity to strike a major blow against international terrorism. Through her scope, she could see the 8 men arranging themselves around a large table. They were talking animatedly, probably discussing plans for future attacks against innocent people. They looked relaxed and confident, completely unaware that they were being watched by a Marine sniper hidden in the rocks nearly a kilometer away. Sarah selected her first target, a man she recognized as Omar Hassan, the leader of a terrorist organization responsible for bombing attacks across Europe. He was sitting at the head of the table, gesturing as he spoke to the others. At this range, Sarah could see his face clearly through her scope. She adjusted her breathing pattern, slowing her heart rate, and preparing her body for the precision shooting sequence she was about to execute. In long-range shooting, the tiniest movement could cause a miss, so every aspect of her body position had to be perfect. Sarah placed the crosshairs of her scope precisely on the center of Hassan's chest and began applying pressure to the trigger. She had fired thousands of practice rounds with this rifle, and she knew exactly how much pressure was needed to release the firing pin. The first shot broke at exactly 14:31 hours. Through her scope, Sarah saw Hassan collapse instantly as the bullet struck him center mass. The other men around the table looked around in confusion for a split second, not understanding what had happened. Sarah was already transitioning to her second target. Ahmed Nazir, the bomb maker responsible for the attack on the American embassy in Baghdad, was starting to stand up from his chair. The crosshairs settled on his chest, and Sarah fired again. 2 down, 6 to go. By now, the remaining targets were beginning to realize they were under attack, but they still had no idea where the shots were coming from. Some were running toward the stairwell that led back into the building. Others were looking around frantically, trying to spot the sniper. Sarah's third target was moving fast toward the stairs. She led him slightly with her crosshairs, accounting for his movement, and fired. The bullet caught him just as he reached the stairwell door. He tumbled forward and didn't move again. Target 4 was the most dangerous of the group, a former military officer who had defected to join the terrorists. Unlike the others, he immediately threw himself flat on the rooftop and began crawling toward what little cover was available behind an air conditioning unit. Sarah tracked him through her scope and waited for a clear shot. When he paused to look around, she fired. The bullet penetrated the thin metal of the air conditioning unit and struck him anyway. 4 down. 4 to go. The remaining targets were now in full panic. 2 of them had reached the stairwell and were trying to get through the door, but they were blocking each other in their haste to escape. Sarah's 5th shot took down one of them. Her 6th shot got the other one just as he disappeared into the stairwell. That left 2 targets still alive on the rooftop. Both were running toward the edge, apparently planning to jump to an adjacent building. Sarah knew she had to stop them before they could escape. Target 7 was the closer one to the edge. Sarah tracked him through her scope, led him slightly, and fired. He stumbled and fell just short of the roof's edge. The final target, realizing he was the last one alive, changed direction and ran toward a different part of the rooftop, where there was more cover. Sarah tracked him through her scope, waiting for a clear shot. When he paused behind a ventilation shaft, she fired her 8th and final shot. Silence fell over the rooftop terrace. In the space of 12 minutes, Sarah had eliminated 8 of the world's most wanted terrorists. She continued watching through her scope for several more minutes to confirm that all targets were down and that no other threats were emerging from inside the building. Phoenix Base, Lone Wolf, mission complete. All 8 targets are neutralized. There was a pause before the radio response came. Lone Wolf, Phoenix Base. Say again your last transmission. Phoenix Base. All 8 targets are confirmed down. Mission complete. Outstanding, Lone Wolf. Satellite confirms no movement on the rooftop. Begin withdrawal to extraction point immediately. Sarah began breaking down her position, packing her gear with the same systematic efficiency she had used to set it up. She cleaned her rifle and secured all her equipment, making sure she left no trace of her presence. In a few minutes, this rocky outcrop would look exactly as it had before she arrived. As she prepared to begin her withdrawal, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 8 shots, 8 hits, 0 misses. It was the kind of shooting performance that would have been impressive on a practice range, much less in a combat situation against real targets. But she also knew the mission wasn't over yet. She still had to make it to the extraction point without being caught by the compound's security forces. By now, the guards would have discovered the bodies on the rooftop, and they would be searching for whoever was responsible. Sarah began moving away from her shooting position, retracing her route toward the extraction point. Behind her, she could hear shouts and vehicle engines starting up at the compound. The terrorists' security forces were beginning to react, but they would be searching in all the wrong places. As she moved through the desert terrain, Sarah's radio crackled again. Lone Wolf, Phoenix Base. Be advised, enemy forces are deploying search teams in multiple directions. Maintain noise and light discipline. Copy, Phoenix Base. Moving to extraction point now. Sarah increased her pace slightly, but she was careful not to make noise or leave obvious tracks. The extraction point was still over 1 kilometer away, and she needed to reach it before the enemy search teams expanded their perimeter far enough to find her trail. 20 minutes later, she crested a ridge and could see the extraction landing zone in the distance. Her radio crackled with the voice of the helicopter pilot. Lone Wolf, this is Eagle Flight. We have you in sight, landing in 2 minutes. Sarah felt a wave of relief as she heard the sound of rotor blades approaching. The mission was almost over. In a few minutes, she would be safely aboard the helicopter and heading back to friendly territory. As the helicopter touched down, Sarah ran toward it in a crouch, keeping her head below the level of the rotor blades. The crew chief helped her aboard and secured her gear as the aircraft lifted off immediately. Phoenix Base, Eagle Flight is airborne with package secure, the pilot reported over the radio. As the helicopter flew away from the target area, Sarah looked back toward the compound. She could see vehicles with their lights on driving around in seemingly random patterns as the security forces searched for a threat they would never find. In 12 minutes of precision shooting, a quiet Marine that most people never noticed had eliminated 8 of the world's most dangerous terrorists. It was a mission that would be talked about in classified briefing rooms for years to come, and it was about to make Sarah Martinez famous in ways she had never imagined. The helicopter ride back to the classified airfield gave Sarah time to process what had just happened. In 12 minutes, she had accomplished what entire military units sometimes couldn't achieve in months of operations. 8 high-value targets eliminated in a single engagement with no collateral damage and no friendly casualties. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Sarah felt something unexpected. Instead of celebration or pride, she felt a quiet sense of completion. This was what she had trained for. This was why she had spent countless hours on shooting ranges, why she had pushed herself through the most difficult military schools, why she had accepted assignments that kept her away from family and friends for months at a time. The helicopter landed at the airfield as the sun was setting, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples. As Sarah stepped off the aircraft, she was met by Colonel Mitchell and several other officers she didn't recognize. Their expressions told her immediately that something had changed. "Outstanding work, Sergeant Martinez," Colonel Mitchell said, but his tone was different from the casual way he had spoken to her that morning. There was a formality now, a sense of respect that hadn't been there before. One of the other officers stepped forward. "Sergeant Martinez, I'm General Patricia Thompson, Deputy Director of Special Operations. I need to debrief you immediately." Sarah had never met a general before, much less been personally debriefed by one. She saluted crisply. "Yes, ma'am." The debriefing took place in a secure conference room filled with more high-ranking officers than Sarah had ever seen in one place. There were representatives from multiple military branches, intelligence agencies, and even some people in civilian clothes who didn't identify themselves. General Thompson led the session, asking detailed questions about every aspect of the mission. How long had it taken to identify each target? What was the sequence of shots? Had there been any unexpected complications? How had Sarah maintained such accuracy under pressure? Sarah answered each question professionally, sticking to the facts and avoiding any speculation or opinion. But she could sense that the people in the room were looking at her differently now. The dismissive glances and casual indifference she was used to were gone, replaced by something that felt strange and unfamiliar. It took her a while to recognize what it was: respect. After 2 hours of debriefing, General Thompson dismissed the other officers. When she and Sarah were alone, the general's demeanor became less formal. "Sergeant Martinez, do you understand what you accomplished today?" "I completed the mission as ordered, ma'am." General Thompson smiled. "That's exactly the kind of response I would expect from you. But let me put this in perspective. In one operation, you eliminated more high-value terrorist targets than most special operations units accomplish in an entire year. The combined bounties on those 8 individuals totaled over $60 million. Sarah nodded, but remained silent. She had never been motivated by money or recognition, and she wasn't sure how to respond to this kind of praise. "There's something else you need to know," General Thompson continued. This operation is going to become public knowledge. We can't keep something this significant classified indefinitely, and frankly, the American people deserve to know about your success." For the first time since the mission began, Sarah felt genuinely surprised. "Ma'am, I thought special operations were supposed to remain secret." "Usually, yes. But this is different. The elimination of these 8 targets has already disrupted terrorist networks across 3 continents. Intelligence agencies around the world are reporting that planned attacks have been canceled because the leadership structure has been destroyed." General Thompson pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. "The President has been briefed on your mission. There's going to be a ceremony at the White House next week. You're receiving the Distinguished Service Cross, and you're being promoted to Gunnery Sergeant." Sarah stared at the folder, not quite believing what she was hearing. 6 months ago, she had been just another anonymous Marine. Now she was going to meet the President and receive one of the military's highest decorations. "With respect, ma'am, I was just doing my job." "And that's exactly why you're the right person to represent what the American military is capable of," General Thompson replied. "You didn't seek glory or recognition. You simply executed your mission with exceptional skill and professionalism." The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, interviews, and preparations. Sarah found herself thrust into a world she had never experienced before. Public affairs officers coached her on how to speak to reporters. Protocol specialists explained the procedures for White House ceremonies. Uniform specialists fitted her for a dress blue uniform that actually fit her properly instead of the standard issue clothing she was used to. But the biggest change was in how people treated her. Marines who had walked past her in the hallways for years now stopped to shake her hand. Officers who had never acknowledged her existence suddenly wanted to have conversations about her career plans. Even the base commander, a full colonel who Sarah had only seen from a distance before, invited her to his office for coffee. The story broke in the news media 3 days after the mission. At first, the reports were vague, mentioning only that a special operations mission had eliminated several terrorist leaders. But within hours, more details began to emerge. Someone had leaked information about the lone sniper who had taken out 8 targets in 12 minutes. Sarah's phone began ringing constantly with calls from reporters, book publishers, and movie producers. Her small apartment was surrounded by news trucks and photographers. She had to be moved to a secure location on base to escape the media attention. The transformation from unknown Marine to national hero was overwhelming. Sarah had spent her entire adult life working in the shadows, and suddenly she was one of the most famous people in America. Her photograph was on the front page of every newspaper, and television news shows were running hour-long specials about her mission. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sarah herself. For years, she had accepted being overlooked and underestimated. She had grown comfortable with being invisible, with letting her work speak for itself while other people got the recognition. Now she was learning what it felt like to be acknowledged for her abilities. The White House ceremony was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She stood in the Oval Office while the President of the United States pinned the Distinguished Service Cross to her uniform and praised her courage and skill. Cameras flashed constantly, and reporters shouted questions that she was instructed not to answer. "Gunnery Sergeant Martinez," the President said during the brief ceremony, "your actions have made America safer and sent a clear message to terrorists around the world. You represent the very best of our armed forces." After the ceremony, Sarah was introduced to members of Congress, senior military leaders, and foreign ambassadors. Everyone wanted to meet the quiet Marine who had accomplished the impossible. She shook hands with people she had only seen on television, and listened to praise from some of the most powerful people in the world. But despite all the attention and recognition, Sarah remained fundamentally the same person. She was polite but reserved with the media, professional but humble when speaking to senior officers, and completely unchanged when talking to her fellow Marines. A week after the White House ceremony, Sarah returned to her unit at Joint Base Andrews. She expected things to go back to normal, but she quickly discovered that her life had changed permanently. Her success had opened doors that had been closed before. She was offered positions with elite units that previously wouldn't have considered her. Defense contractors wanted to hire her as a consultant. Foreign governments requested her expertise for training their own snipers. Colonel Mitchell called her into his office to discuss her future options. "Martinez, you've got choices to make. You could stay with your current unit, but frankly, that would be a waste of your talents. Special Operations Command wants you for their Advanced Sniper Instructor program. The CIA has expressed interest in recruiting you. Hell, I've had 3 different defense contractors offer to double your salary if you leave the Marines." Sarah considered the options carefully. She had never imagined having so many opportunities, and the attention was still somewhat uncomfortable for her. "Sir, what do you recommend?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happy. You've earned the right to choose your own path." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment thinking about everything that had happened. 2 weeks earlier, she had been just another Marine that most people ignored. Now she was famous, decorated, and had her choice of prestigious assignments. But as she reflected on the mission and its aftermath, Sarah realized that the most important thing hadn't changed. She was still the same person who believed in serving her country and protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. The recognition was nice, but it wasn't what motivated her. She made her decision the next morning. She would stay in the Marines, accept the instructor position with Special Operations Command, and use her newfound fame to help train the next generation of military snipers. She could make a bigger difference by sharing her knowledge and skills than by pursuing personal gain. 6 months later, Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Martinez was running one of the most successful sniper training programs in the military. Students came from all branches of the armed forces and from allied nations around the world to learn from the Marine who had proven that exceptional skill and dedication could overcome any obstacle. The students who arrived at her courses often expected to meet some kind of superhuman warrior. Instead, they found a quiet, professional instructor who emphasized the fundamentals of marksmanship, the importance of patience and discipline, and the responsibility that came with the ability to take human life at long range. Sarah's classes had the highest success rate of any sniper school in the world, but more importantly, her students went on to accomplish missions that saved American lives and disrupted terrorist operations around the globe. The skills she taught and the example she set multiplied her impact far beyond what she could have achieved as an individual operator. Years later, when military historians wrote about the war on terrorism, they would identify Sarah's mission as a turning point. The elimination of 8 terrorist leaders in 12 minutes had disrupted networks that had taken years to build. More importantly, it had demonstrated that American special operations capabilities were more advanced than anyone had imagined. But Sarah's legacy wasn't just about one successful mission. It was about proving that excellence could come from unexpected places, that quiet professionalism was more valuable than self-promotion, and that the most dangerous warriors were often the ones that nobody noticed until it was too late. The Marine who had been invisible for so many years had become impossible to ignore. But in the end, Sarah Martinez was exactly who she had always been. A professional soldier who did her job with exceptional skill and unwavering dedication. The world had simply finally noticed what her targets never lived to learn, that underestimating the quiet ones could be a fatal mistake. In a career full of classified missions and secret operations, Sarah's most important contribution might have been showing young Marines that heroism didn't require fame or recognition. Sometimes, the most significant victories were won by people who simply did their jobs better than anyone thought possible. The 8 targets never knew what hit them. By the time they realized they were under attack, it was already over. They had dismissed the possibility that a lone sniper could threaten their carefully protected meeting. They were wrong about that. just as so many people had been wrong about the quiet Marine who proved that exceptional people don't always look the way others expect them to.